Hey guys, and welcome back to History Revision Success. So we are going straight back into the America course for your GCSE, and we are about to look today at the New Deal. So remember from our last video that Roosevelt is now president. He had promised a new America, and now he had to deliver. He famously promised action and action now. He knew that passing proposals would take years to become law, so he asked Congress to give him emergency powers, which they did for 100 days, a pretty dramatic thing. From the 8th of March to the 6th of June of 1933, Roosevelt basically had the power to do whatever he wanted. He didn't have to wait for Congress to grant things. He didn't have to wait to get proposals through to become law. He could just do them, okay? And this gave him the possibility of really being able to address the Depression in the first 100 days of his presidency. So within his kind of statement of action and action now, he did the following 5 things. He stabilized the bank, or these were his aims at least. He stabilized the banks. He aimed to help the unemployed. He wanted to end prohibition, and he wanted to help the farmers and help industry. This is what we call his New Deal. Now, in a moment, I'm going to go through each of those in detail and talk to you about what he did in each category to try and fix the problem. Before I do, I just want to go through kind of 2 things really that helped him to manage this. How did he actually go about doing this? Now, the first thing he did was he created what we call alphabet agencies. These were organizations filled with clever individuals to try and brainstorm ideas. He called these his brain trust, okay? These were people who were thinking of plans, proposing things, coming up with ideas, things like that. Now, Roosevelt also used a theory based on pumping money back into the economy. He created jobs and paid wages in order to encourage people to start buying goods again. This in turn would allow businesses to grow and hire new workers. So the idea is if the government does it first, if we pay people to do things, they're going to become wealthier, then they're going to start buying things. And that means that those original companies and businesses are going to get more money, and then they can take over the hiring of people rather than the government. This can work well. However, it can also be seen as simply the government throwing money at the problem. Once the money runs out, the problem still exists. This was called priming the pump, and it's something which Roosevelt is often criticized for. And you might get a cartoon similar to the one on the screen behind me that is satirical in the sense of kind of questioning and querying the effectiveness of priming the pump. Okay, I'm going to go through now what he actually did in the New Deal to try and meet each of these 5 aims. So, in terms of the banks, over 5,000 banks had closed down since 1930. People no longer trusted them and did not want to put their savings back in them. Why would you put your money back in the bank if you just lost, everything the first time around? In order to deal with this and to kind of reinvigorate confidence for the banks, Roosevelt brought about the Emergency Banking Act. This closed all banks for a 4-day bank holiday, which is where we get the name from, by the way. Every bank was inspected to check if it was solvent. Government then lent some banks money, and it led to people feeling confident enough to put their money back into the banks, of which $1 billion was then put back into banks by individuals. This meant banks could therefore in turn lend money again to businesses. In terms of the unemployed, Roosevelt started with the Economy Act. This cut the pay of everyone working for the government and armed forces by 15%. In total, this saved $1 billion, which was then used to put into these other projects. We had the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. This employed unemployed 18 to 25-year-olds to plant trees, dig canals, clear footpaths, strengthen riverbanks. There was a program to control mosquitoes, which actually ended up ending malaria, and it created in total 2.5 million jobs. Then there was the CWA, the Civil Works Administration. This provided temporary work for 4 million men, building schools, airports, roads, and 150,000 public toilets. There was the FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Agency. This gave $500 million to states to help the homeless and starving people. Money was then spent on soup kitchens, blankets, clothes, and nursery schools. His next aim was prohibition, and he brought about the Beer Act, which made it legal to sell alcohol again. This meant the government could then start making money by taxing this. His next aim was to help industry and workers, and within that there was the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. This encouraged workers and employers to work out a code of fair conditions, wages and prices. It controlled the right to join trade unions, and 2.5 million firms, 22 million workers joined the scheme. It was voluntary and many refused to join. Practices weren't always followed. There was also the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which gave loans to people struggling with mortgages. It helped 300,000 homeowners in the first year. There was also the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which provided work building dams and electric power stations. In terms of farmers, there was the FCA, which was the Farm Credit Administration, which lent money to farmers who couldn't keep up with loan payments. It loaned out 100 million in the first 18 months. There was also the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Agency, which paid farmers to produce less and destroy some of the food they had produced. This meant prices rose as supply decreased. Remember, one of the problems that farmers faced was there was too much supply for demand. So there was too much product, so the price was getting lower because there was too much of it. So what they did was they actually asked people to destroy food, which, might sound ridiculous at a time where people are starving, but some of the food was destroyed in order to bring the price up of food. As there was less of it, it was more in demand. Between 1933 and 1939, farmers' incomes doubled. However, as I said, this did face criticism as we had food being destroyed at a time when people were starving. Now, by 1935, Roosevelt was facing a barrage of criticism. His hopes to transform America hadn't quite worked out how he wanted. And we're going to look in a second video or the next video at how effective these ideas, these plans were for the New Deal. But before we do that, I just want to go over his second New Deal. So things hadn't worked out quite how he wanted, and he met with a group of senators and close advisors to come up with this second New Deal. Now, within the second New Deal, we had the Wagner Act. Now, this forced all employers to allow trade unions to operate. This meant there was negotiation over pay and conditions, and it also became illegal to sack workers for being in a union. There was the Social Security Act. This provided state pensions for the elderly and widows, and it allowed state governments to work with federal government to provide help for the sick and disabled. It set up an unemployment insurance scheme. Employers and workers paid a contribution every week. If workers then became unemployed, they would receive a small amount of benefits. It's very much, like an insurance policy or a pension that we might have today. He had the Works Progress Administration, which brought together all of the organizations whose aim it was to create jobs, extended work building projects to create jobs for office workers and unemployed actors, actresses, and photographers. There was a Farm Security Administration photographic project, which took 80,000 pictures of farming areas during the New Deal, and the government also paid artists to paint pictures of cities and towns. We also had the Resettlement Administration, which helped smallholders and tenant farmers who had not been helped by the AAA. This organization moved 500,000 families to better quality land and housing. It was then replaced by the Farm Security Administration in 1937, which gave special loans to farmers to help them buy land. It also built camps to provide decent living conditions and work for migrant farmers. So that in total is all of the actions of the New Deal and the Second New Deal, everything that Roosevelt did in order to try and fix the problem the Great Depression had caused. We're about to look at opposition and the effectiveness of this, but I guess the one thing you can't criticize is the fact that he was really trying to do things on a backdrop where really nothing had been done previously to try and resolve the problems.